Hi, I hope everyone's doing okay. It's well past due, another progress update on my work in progress O-gauge layout, Spring Mill Street. It's been a while, partly because of Christmas getting in the way, but mainly because I have a day job. Like most people, I guess, real life gets in the way. And for me, although I'd love to spend more time with the modelling, the day job still pays a lot better than the modelling. It's an enjoyable pastime, which is the way I want to keep it. It's you can put a certain amount of pressure on yourself to try and get work done, and to some extent, making videos like this help incentivize. But otherwise, it's I try and pick up bits and pieces on the layout when I have time, but also when I have the mojo. I think that's a really important point to make for anyone who's into their modelling. Is it should feel like some form of relaxation or distraction, I guess, unless you're doing it professionally, obviously, which I'm not. But that means you have to pick and choose the moments when you're actually feeling it, when you actually not just have the free time, but actually want to do some modelling as well. Anyway, as far as an update is concerned, some things have happened since the last update video, which was back in 2025. This is February 2026 now. The track work's moving on. Right in front of you, you can see some of the new track work has been laid since last time. I'm still working on this complicated outside slip here, but I've actually finished all of the complicated switch and crossing stuff now. Both switches, each end of the slip, are actually in place and working with servo drive via Megapoints controllers, which I've covered in previous videos. All the V crossings are done that need soldering. So I'd say about 2/3 of this complicated piece of track work is actually done. As you can see, there's the outside or the other side of the slip, which is more like a diamond crossing. There's what sometimes is called a K crossing, which still needs to be completed here. But it's more mainly wing rails and check rails. So I haven't got around to doing it yet, but again, it's about the mojo. I haven't felt the urge to do it. I got the work that you see here was done before Christmas, and I tried to leave it alone. Obviously, like most people, have a break over Christmas, which included for me a break from modelling as well as a break from work while we had visitors and relatives visiting. I wanted to just quickly recap some of the most useful tools that I've found for O-gauge. I think I mentioned before that I built a lot of track in P4. One of the things which I struggled with in O-gauge, which surprised me, is curving track, bending track. For general, actual proper bends, like when forming wing rails and the flare on the end of check rails, these parallel pliers, these are Maun ones, M-A-U-N, Maun. But I think there are other cheaper Chinese brands available, but these are brilliant. These are probably my most used tool when it comes to forming track work. But when it comes to making curves rather than bends, so the more gentle kind of curves, like you can see here on this piece of track, in 4mm scale, I just used to use the thumb on finger technique, which is basically just applying gentle pressure with the thumb while it's braced between the fingers and then just moving up and down. And in 4mm scale, that's ample pressure to form most of the curves that you need. But in 7mm scale, O gauge or O scale, It's pretty hard work on the thumb and fingers to do it like that. It can be done, but it takes a surprising amount of pressure. It might depend what kind of rail you're using. Here I'm using what's called a high nickel silver rail. I used to use steel mainly in 4mm, but here, living in Yorkshire, there's high humidity here, and the steel track is prone to rust, unfortunately. So nickel silver, which was very commonly used in all scales, nickel silver rail. I don't particularly like the appearance of it. It has that slightly yellowy brown appearance, which can look okay. But I just prefer the look of this high nickel silver rail. It looks very much like a steel in its colour, but it solders nicely, like nickel. Nickel sheet tends to do like when you're making model kits out of etch, and it does keep its brightness. Whether it actually remains clean, that remains to be seen. Obviously the layout's not getting much use at the moment because it's still work in progress. But yeah, so I was talking about tools. So these are the parallel pliers, very useful. The other thing, as I said, about curving rail is hard. So I found this thing, which is an interesting looking contraption. Hopefully you can see how it works. It's actually not meant for rail bending. It's what luthiers or luthiers use for bending frets, the bars that go across the strings when you're making guitars or ukuleles, that kind of thing. But it works very well, incredibly well actually, for bending 7mm rail. It's a very useful thing. I use it all the time now. They are, again, this kind of tool, I think you can make your own. In fact, I think I've seen YouTube videos where people show how to make their own. But I bought this one off a well-known online shopping site. In fact, there were loads of them, all basically exactly the same thing, but with a huge variation in price. From, I think I paid about £10 or £12 for this, but I saw that the same thing, well, it looked the same to me, went right up to £50 or £60. I certainly wouldn't recommend spending that much money on one, but for a tenner or 15 quid maybe, it's possibly a worthwhile investment, unless you're keen, as I say, to have a go at making one yourself. Yep. I can, if anyone wants to see a demonstration of one in use, I'm happy to show that, but I think you get the general gist. Slide the rail in between the big bearing and the smaller bearings, and then you have this adjustable knurled tensioner on top. The arrow is just there to help me remember which way is to tighten, because it's not righty-tighty here, it's the opposite. So the arrow is just there to help me remember which way to turn. And then you can obviously, you have this handle on the back, sorry, I'm blocking the shot, which will obviously pull the rail through as well as bend it at the same time. Yeah, it's a good little gadget. What else? Oh yeah, a Sharpie pen. This is the permanent type. It's I find it really useful for not just marking on the layout itself, but for actually marking bits of rail. You can make a mark on this high nickel silver rail. It's not indelible, which is useful, but it's relatively indelible, so it'll stay on there for as long as you need it to stay on while you're marking up lengths of rail and maybe the positions of things like this, the elbow, just in front of the fine point of the V crossing, so you know where you are when you're making your bends with your pliers. Very useful for that kind of thing. Yeah, so that was, I think I've talked about the other tips and tricks in a previous video, so I just wanted to mention these few tools here. Cocktail sticks as well, or toothpicks. Really useful, not maybe so much in track work, but generally speaking, I find them useful for maybe when you're trying to hold stuff for soldering. Just put a toothpick between yourself and the rail, stops you getting your fingers burnt, but also useful for weathering models as well, which I'll talk about maybe slightly later in the video if you have time. So yeah, though the progress has been a bit delayed, I say, because of work and other commitments, but also because of the weather up here in the north of England, Yorkshire. It's been a horrendously wet winter, but it's also, the light has been absolutely awful. I'm filming this just around lunchtime, but I've got all the lights turned on in this room as well. I really need to buy some better lights, and once the layout's actually running, I will invest in some decent lights. But yeah, that's another reason why I haven't done so much work. And as I mentioned, I've been doing some painting and weathering of models, which I'll talk about, but that's also been massively reduced what I can actually do or feel comfortable doing while the light isn't good. Artificial light is okay for some people for painting, but I find even the ones which are supposedly daylight temperature, I find those not so easy for me to use anyway. It's partly to do with my age and my failing eyesight, so I tend to use these. They're probably on the board here somewhere. Yep. I use these things for most of my close-up work these days. They're just ready readers, but in a high strength. I've got one of those sort of magnifying things with an LED torch in, but for taking on and off for close-up and normal work, I find these really useful. And the string just means I know where to find them. I don't know if you're like me, but the worst thing about having useful tools is that you can never find them after you've put them down, at least with the string. It means even after I take these off, they're usually just hanging around my neck. Not always, but most of the time. Some people have asked for a bit of a layout tour. It's not a massively big layout, which is a bit of a surprise to me, because when the baseboards were made, I thought, oh, it looks huge, it's going to be great. But of course, as soon as you start putting track down, you realise that it's not actually that big at all. There's two baseboards here, the same length, approximately 6 foot long. So this section's about 12 foot long with these two boards here. And then at this end here, there'll be a shorter board, which is a transition board from the layout to a traverser. So there'll be some kind of scenic break at this point here, probably some kind of bridge, which is a little bit unprototypical, if I'm allowed to use that word. As I may have mentioned before, Springmill Street is actually based on a real location, or the location itself still exists, but it's not a rail connected yard anymore. But it was created, I think, as long ago as the 1870s, so it's been around for a long time. And originally it was a coal yard which was used to serve a power station, but I think in its later life it was used primarily for serving domestic coal, and that probably died out. Well, as if any of you are old enough to remember, you might still remember coal being used in the house in the 60s and the 70s, but by the 80s it had practically all disappeared, and that coincides with when the real location for Springmill Street went out of use. I think the track was all removed in the mid-80s, but the period of my model is a little bit variable. My main interest is, as I grew up with British Rail blue diesels of the mid-70s, so that's more or less the midpoint or sweet spot, if you like, for the era which I'm modelling on the layout here. But due to the nature of the yard, it's a bit of a, I think it's what the Americans would call a last mile layout, because it's a dead end. It's a goods terminus effectively, and it's awkward in its design, that partly deliberately and partly because the real yard was fairly awkward in its location and design as well. I've got the camera on a tripod, which is maybe why it's a bit weird swinging around, but I'm hoping it helps keep it a bit more stable, and I can elevate the viewpoint so you can more or less see. This is all of the scenic section you're seeing right now, more or less. And this is the entrance to the yard here that you're looking at. So it's designed with, as it was in real life, that all inbound movements would come in on this track here. So this is the reception, or down there is the reception siding for the inbound, and this is the outbound. So there's only one way in and there's only one way out, which is part of its awkwardness. This track here, which goes to the fiddle yard, again, did exist in real life. This went to the coal drops, and amazingly those coal drops are still there now, behind Mill Lane signal box in Bradford. And the signal box is still there as well, but it's not in use anymore, unfortunately. But I'm not planning to model the coal drops themselves. I'd need a room twice as long as this one to do that. So this is basically primarily being used as a head shunt for the sidings down there, rather than using the in and outbound tracks for shunting purposes, although I guess they could be used for that as well. One thing which I can just show here, when it comes to track building, might be interesting for people to see. This is obviously the edge of the baseboard, and I don't think this is a particularly new or novel idea, but I'm using these plastic functional chairs, and I've talked before about little brass rivets which the rails are soldered to, occasionally where I need to put dropper wires through, but otherwise the brass, in fact you can just about see one, a couple here. A couple of these brass rivets here with dropper wires underneath, and the rails are soldered here and here, but it's not particularly for structural or strength reasons. But at the edge of the baseboard here, where extra strength is required, there's a couple of brass wood screws in here, which the rails have been soldered to. And again, I say I don't think this is a particularly new or novel idea, but the brass wood screws work out pretty well. It's a nice surface area to solder to, and it's easy to solder to with the screws being brass, but they're coming down into the board quite a distance, so there's quite a lot of strength here now on the edge of the board, which is obviously useful because these are the parts of the rail which are like to be clobbered or damaged when you're moving the boards around or disassembling or reassembling boards. But the wood screw has a very useful side effect, or I guess it's a built-in design feature of any screw, which is that the height of the screw can be varied very simply just by turning the slot in the screw. So it means once you've got these down, you can tweak the screw so that it's actually perfectly supporting the end of the rails at the right height before you solder. And I've used the same technique further down, where the board crosses onto the next board. Yeah, so inbound, scissors pointing this way, inbound, outbound, and again the awkwardness of the real site is portrayed here. I think for O-gauge layouts, obviously most people are going to have less room, have to be slightly more compact layouts, but here again, the short sidings, or the amount of siding space there is, means that there's no room for a run round loop. So all trains which are coming in to the yard, very awkwardly, the arriving train can't release itself. It has to be released by another loco, or reverse out, propel out of the yard, which is a feature, or was a feature, of the real site, but actually operationally for modelling purposes, although awkward, actually makes it a bit more interesting and makes the layout more compact as well. I haven't got to make space at this end of the layout for turnouts to release locos. So arriving trains would come through this There's another slip here along where these coal wagons are parked at the moment and stop here. And then a shunting loco would come and would pick up those wagons and release it. There's another siding here. This looks like a reception siding, but actually it's not accessible via this single slip. Again, the awkwardness is in play here, which is realistic, as I say, for this site, where the slip's only on one side, that side. You can't, as you come in, you can't slip into this other siding here. You can only get to it via the crossover up there. And that's how you also get to the actual receiving sidings, the coal handling sidings. So there's the reception siding and then two coal handling sidings. One where the vans are parked now would be the one where most of the coal unloading was being done. And then as the wagons were emptied, they'd be left in this siding here. Ready to be retrieved, and in most cases, I guess you can imagine this would happen in real life. An inbound train of 4 wagons would come in, and the coal wagons would be moved into the coal handling siding, and then once the loco was released, it would then pick up the empty wagons in the adjacent siding and take them back out, and the other pair of scissors pointing back out of the yard. And as I say, the road which goes to the coal drops, if they were really there, is just used as a bit of a head shunt for moving things in and out of the sidings. So that's the layout. I'm taking it easy in terms of the track construction. I'm enjoying it, but as I say, it's when the time is available and when I'm in the mood to do it. I do like doing other things besides building track. I do like painting and weathering locos. I have been trying to keep a few things on the go, even while the light's been not so good. I ambitiously started this Class 03 shunting locomotive here, and I was going to have a go at painting it in a weathered rail blue condition, which I started using an enamel-based proprietary weathered blue paint. Believe it or not, I've never used enamel paints. I've always used acrylics, but I thought I'd give this enamel paint a go, and I didn't really get on with it particularly well. There's nothing wrong with the quality of the paint. It's just it's the quality of the painter. I'm just not used to working with it. So after achieving what looked like an okay finish to me, albeit perhaps a little bit unrealistically uniform, I went back to using my acrylics, and I have made myself up a weathered blue acrylic wash, which I can just paint on with a flat brush. I don't know if you can see it too well on the camera. So it's not just creating a faded finish, but hopefully you can see. I'm not sure if it's coming out on camera. Sorry, I'm trying to hold 2 things at once. You should hopefully see you can get some sort of streaking effect as well, which I was trying to get. To be honest, it's probably not that far off being finished, but there's still, for me, there's still plenty of things which need sorting out on it. So when the light's better, I'll get back to that. But yeah, the faded, so you could use, so I have got here a proprietary Hellion Class 31 in BR Blue. That's their paint finish. If you wanted to fade it, I might try this on this one actually. I might just use this acrylic wash, which is very, very dilute paint, which I've mixed up, not using proprietary British Rail Blue colours, but just mix something up until it looked right to my eye. A bit of blue, a bit of grey, a tiny drop of green. British Rail Blue paint's quite green, or can be. I think it depends what primer they use underneath the paint, how green the blue paint actually looks, but I think it definitely has got fair amount of green in it. And in here, a tiny drop of is water, not alcohol, not IPA or acrylic thinners, anything like that. It's just distilled water, actually taken from a dehumidifier. I just pinched a bit of the water. I'm not sure it's totally pure, but it's at least will have less mineral content than the water that we have up here in Yorkshire. So yeah, just plain water and a drop of detergent. Well, to say a drop, a tiny, although you can see some bubbles here, it's got a tiny amount of hand soap or dish soaps in there, which is just to break the surface tension, to make sure that when you're applying the paint, which I do using a broad flat brush, that you don't get watermarks, that the paint flows, settles without leaving watermarks as it dries. Yep. So there's that still to be worked on in terms of weathering. This press flow wagon here, which is a cement carrying wagon, was kind of an impulse purchase. Where I'm living is not too far away from where this fantastic model shop, Ellis Clark, is based in Skipton in Yorkshire. And they were doing a deal on these wagons, which they manufacture themselves. This looked like a bit of a bargain to me, so I thought, well, I'll have a go. I'll buy one. I can't really justify it for this layout. Certainly not having a rake of them, and even one by itself is probably a bit out of place here, but I just like the look of the wagon itself. And when I bought it, it looked fantastic, in pristine condition. But Neil Armitage, who is Ellis Clark's in-house weathering guru, he's done a fantastic YouTube video on the approach that he uses for weathering these wagons. And this sounds, or it might sound slightly patronising or even insulting, but it's not meant to be. His weathering technique is fantastically quick and dirty, quite literally, and he shows you the few short steps that he goes through to get some fantastic results. I thought I'd have a go of almost completely following his techniques, and it only took me about an hour to produce what you see here, and I'm very happy with the result. I probably won't touch it again, but it's basically weathering paint and weathering powders to create this sort of dried cement look on the top. And the only thing which I've really done, just to make it a bit more individualistic or different, is just hand painted back in some rust effects on the ironwork and the latches and covers, and just touched in a few features on the chassis, but otherwise completely followed Neil Armitage's demonstration video. Fantastic. Lovely wagon, runs beautifully. It's got built-in suspension, and I'll have to find out a reason to actually run it on this predominantly coal yard based layout, so maybe I can pretend that they were experimenting or testing transportation of domestic ash from coal fires or something like that. I don't know, but I think they did use it like that in real life, not on an industrial basis. I mean, not for ash from people's home fires, but ash from power stations. They used these wagons for transporting that ash, fly ash, I think they called it. Then there's this thing which I built years and years ago. One of the first O-gauge kits actually that I worked on. It's two kits, and I think it's a salutary lesson for anyone who's starting to build, particularly locomotive kits in any scale, but in O scale. It was one of the first ones that I tried to build, and then I gave up and bought another one, and gave up on that one too. So what you actually see here is the result of two kits which are married together. The bottom half is DJH starter kit, a Class 03, which is the same type of locomotive as this. That thing there, that was a ready to run kit that I'm weathering, but this one was a brass kit, and it's supposedly a starter kit, but I really struggled to build it, particularly to get the chassis to run well, and I kind of gave up on it and put it aside. And then I got myself a Mercian Hudswell Clark kit, which is the top half of the bodywork. And I really struggled with the bodywork of that. And what you actually see here is some bits of the kit which have been soldered together, but then other bits of which I've just scratch built, like the bunker on the back, and the foreshortened access cover on the front, which is a kind of a signature feature excuse me, of these of these type of shunters. But the reason it looks like this so I've got a frog in my throat now, just 2 seconds. So back to this kit, the chassis comes from this DJH, which I finally got to actually run okay, but by that point I was thinking I can maybe make use of it for this and not have to build another chassis for the top half of the bodywork of the Hudswell here. So the two are married together here, and that partly explains why the configuration looks so weird. The only way I could get the body to fit on this chassis is this way round, which is atypical for this type of shunter. Normally the gearbox, the jack shaft and the gearbox is at the front, or the radiator end. But here, because of the steps which come from the Class 03 chassis, there's no room to have them at this end. So, and Hudswell did build some Locos which looked like this, but confusingly they didn't normally have this access cover here at the front, which say it's a particular design feature. I could have got away without putting this here, but I just like the look of it. I think it gives the character of the locomotive. So weathering for this has been going on. Again, for weathering, I'm still learning as I go. There's this picture which is of another Loco, similar kind of looking Loco. Mine isn't meant to look like this, but these kind of prototype photographs are useful because they just show how Locos in industrial use get banged up, where they weather, where they rust, where the bits get worn. This one I'm trying to show in a fairly, I guess you could say, it's not as dilapidated or as decrepit as the one in this picture here. So I haven't overdone the weathering, but the weathering's not finished either. So most of the upper work, I'm fairly happy with the weathering, but the chassis still needs some work doing on it, and the footplate needs some more work doing on it. So I did a little bit of this before Christmas, just because I think I mentioned this on my Facebook page. It was sat there on a shelf and it needed moving, otherwise it was likely to be clobbered by visitors we were having at Christmas just as they walked past. So I picked it up and thought, well, I might as well do a bit more work and actually get it running and working. So it does drive now. At least it's got DCC sound fitted, and it is usable, but I will come back to it when I've got more time and better light to work on it. A bit like there's another thing hiding over there near the Class 03. That's a Connoisseur Kits Drury, which is fundamentally finished. It just needs painting. I'm just waiting for some decent weather to get all the brass cleaned up and get some primer on it. What else I've been working on? This Haljan 03's here, because I don't know why. I think I got it out of the box and thought, oh, it'd be nice to give it a run. It's sound fitted, everything works on it. It's just as it comes out of the box, it's not in the condition I really wanted to be in for Spring Mill Street. So I've got myself some transfers here from Railtech. Excellent transfers. The only thing I would say about them, which is not good for me, but maybe good for people to know, is that I think they work better if you use them when they're fresh, so to speak. I've had no problems applying them, apart from the fact that I've noticed that sometimes that the glue, they sometimes can peel up. They can peel up at the edges, particularly on these curvy numbers. They can tend to peel up, but that you can get around that. But I wouldn't in my experience at least, I wouldn't recommend using any of the proprietary decal solutions, because I don't think they don't agree with the Railtech materials. Tend to make things worse in terms of things peeling up or even deforming terribly. So the thing which I found works best for these in terms of a good surface to apply them to, but also making sure they stick down well, is some Johnson's Clear polish or something like that. Some gloss varnish, a water-based gloss varnish, which can be not a spirit-based varnish or lacquer, but a water-based one. Something, I think aqua gloss, that would be a good equivalent one, but if you're lucky enough still to have some Johnson's Clear varnish, that's a good alternative, which I've still got a couple of bottles of. That works really well in terms of the surface to which to apply the decals, but also helps stick them down as well if you're having problems with them curling up. I've got replacement roof fan grill here. The Hellion one's a bit of an impressionable one. You can see how it's sort of sunk below the surface, which is not particularly realistic. So this is from PH Designs, Phil at PH Designs. And there's some cab footsteps there, which I'll probably make up as well and put on the Loco. One thing I was just going to mention while I'm here, because I see this being asked about all the time. So this Loco came with numbers pre-printed, which I've taken off both ends. This is the first generation of the Hellion Class 31, but it was already numbered, but it was like pre-tops numbered. And I know people are always asking about how to get the numbers off when they're printed on like that. They use this tampo printing technique, which looks great. The finish of the quality of the transfers or the numbers applied look fantastic. But I always struggle to get them off without damaging the actual paintwork underneath, which is important here because I'm quite happy with the BR blue finish here. It will stay like this. I don't really want to repaint the whole Loco. And I know people recommend various things for getting the numbers off. I think one of the favourites is using something like T-Cut, like a car polish, which has got a little bit of a rubbing compound built into it, so it's slightly abrasive, as well as having a little bit of, I think they usually have petroleum spirits or something like that to help dissolve the paint as well as abrade it, which I have used and it works okay, but for me it takes far too much of the numbers here will be white and I end up with the Q-tip or whatever I'm using looking totally blue because I end up taking far too much of the underlying blue paint off. So for this I experimented with one of these, which is a chisel tip blade, a fresh one, and when applied to the Loco like this just by hand, these are incredibly sharp when they are new. What I did to this is you can see I've just very gently filed down the corners. That's because I'm basically using this as a scraper to get the numbers off. And it works fantastically well. As I say, they're super sharp and you can actually just, if you don't apply excessive pressure, you can chisel the numbers off effectively. And just rounding the corners with a metal file, just ensures that when you're using the chisel tip like this, you don't accidentally dig into the surface. Obviously, when you're trying to scrape the numbers off, you want to try and hold the blade as flat to the surface as possible. But if you put sideways pressure on, you can accidentally dig in with the corners by just rounding off the square edges here, and just putting in filing underneath the corners as well. If you do accidentally apply uneven pressure, you're not going to dig into the paintwork. So these have been removed, including both ends, and I think there were there were double arrows at both ends. They've all been taken off using the chisel tip, and I've put some gloss varnish, say that Johnson's Clears, on there, ready for the decals to go on. And then the only other thing which I've been working, which I have actually been enjoying, even though the light's not been so good, it's been an easy thing to work on just on the kitchen table, when my wife allows it, is this Class 08 shunter. I'm just going to put the tripod down like that, try and get it focused in. Hope that's okay, you can see. So this is another proprietary model which came as pre-numbered, as again pre-tops I think, but I knew that I wanted this to be a sort of stalwart locomotive of Bradford. Hamilton Street Depot would have been seen in this location. I've got photographs of it in this location. 08226, so it's been renumbered using Railtech. Surprising number of other adjustments made which probably aren't immediately visible, but when you look at the livery variances that there are for this particular class of locomotive, they at first glance in BR Blue they all look the same, but there's so many differences. It's really important to stick to your prototype image. So this particular locomotive was overhauled at Doncaster in late 1976, and I'm trying to portray it here in late 1976 or early 1977 condition. So it's more or less ex-works, but not completely clean. These weren't mainline racehorses, so they were very utilitarian. I think they were well looked after at Bradford Depot, or two Leeds depots where it also went, Neville Hill and Holbeck. I think they took care of their shunting locomotives there. It had a relatively long life, and it did certainly didn't seem to go back to works again after 1976. It stayed out until it was probably scrapped in the 80s. But in this condition here, it's just slightly off ex-work. So looking at pictures, I could see that this here is the vent for the main fuel tank. And I noticed that it was very common when filling the locos, obviously, if they're slightly overfilled, that the vent is not just letting out air, it will let out excess fuel. So you get a certain amount of staining here on the top here, which also runs down the sides. Even on a brand new locomotive, you can see that kind of thing going on. And likewise at this end, with the exhaust, sorry for the vibration there. Although this would be freshly painted, it's very common to see rust setting in here, where it's been damaged by the heat of the exhaust. But other detail changes which have been made here, which perhaps aren't so obvious, but to make this more typical for this particular prototype locomotive. The radiator pipes have been painted in blue. They weren't on the ready-to-run model. This end has got 4 lights on, which is correct. The other end, which I'll show you in a second, hasn't got a top light. Again, that's accurate based on what happened to this when it was overhauled at works in 1976. So I took that off. What else? Yeah, there's a few extra details here, which etched details which don't come on the ready-to-run model. There's these little triangular lifting eyes. The radiator panel is a separate part which can be, in works obviously, be lifted off using these lifting eyes. And likewise, the bonnet, the engine cover here, it can slide backwards for access. It's got like these little casters underneath, but also it can be lifted off completely. And I don't know if you can see them here. There's some etched lifting eyes which I've added here, which again don't come on the model. Tiny little things, but when you look at photographs of Class 08s, they kind of stand out. And at this scale, O scale, I think it's worthwhile just adding features like that. They're still a bit small and fiddly, but I think they do add to the overall look of the model. So I put those on. What else? You have to be really aware of handrail positions, these short door handrail positions. do vary from locomotive to locomotive. Very common to see a vertical one here at this end, although this one's correctly showing the horizontal ones. That's how it came. I'm just going to flip it around now. A feature of this 08 226 and is seen on sister locomotives, but not all of them by any means, is this these extra strengthening pieces on the cab rear, which I've just put on using bits of etch, cut-off etch, spare etch from locomotive kits, and then just painted to match the wasp stripes on the rear. Not hard to do, but I think it improves the overall appearance of the locomotive. And the other thing, which is you can see here, which is again something else you have to watch out for when you're looking at these locos. As supplied, the roof on this model was painted black, which could be accurate, but for some models, but for this one, if you look at the pictures, you can see it was definitely painted some shade of grey, dark grey, not blue. On some locomotives it can be BR blue, but it's definitely not blue on this one. It's some shade of grey, which I just picked something. I think it was Tamiya German grey actually, which I used and just painted this on. That wasn't hard to do at all. Buffer beams, where the drawbar gear is, draw gear, the hook and the buffers, yellow on the RTR model, but black, which I think again was common as they went through works in the 70s, for these areas to be painted black. But the foot plate, or the edge of the foot plate or sole plate, is blue now, painted on these locomotives, whereas as delivered on the model it was black, so that's been painted as well. What else? Anyway, a long list of things which you need to keep your eyes open for if you are going to model one of these and you want it to be authentic's too grandiose a word, realistic, that's probably too grandiose a word as well. Anyway, I think it's worth, if you notice something and you think, oh, that looks different, I think it's worth, if you've got the skills to do it and the time to do it, it's worth spending the time to make the model look a bit more realistic. I'm happy with this. It's actually the first time I've weathered a model in a lightly weathered condition. Believe it or not, I think it's much harder to do it in this like this than it is, say, in a slightly more weathered condition like the Hudswell or these coal wagons where I've gone to town with their sort of chipping, or this weathered wood finish, or indeed this Ruston, which is in a very faded colour with lots of oil stains and a little bit of rust and chipping as well. And this Shark, which has got like a weathered paint effect, this needs finishing off. So, but that, so going back to the 08s, this is for me what I would call lightly weathered. Sorry for the camera shake. And there are people out there, Neil Podbury, for example, some fantastic weatherer in any condition, but I am a great admirer of his for the lightly weathered models that he can create. Absolutely fantastic. So for me, it's much harder, and I guess it's about restraint as much as it is about the skill, artistry. I mean, it really is what he does, not what I do, is artistry. If you're going for a heavily weathered model, like that press flow wagon that I showed, if you make a mistake, you can cover it up, usually with more weathering. Obviously that's not the case when you're going for a lightly weathered model here. And it's a balance between trying to get something which does look like it's been sitting outside for a couple of years, but not like it's about to crumble into iron oxide, to rust and dust. Yeah, so first time for me weathering like this, and I'm quite happy with this. How did I do it? Well, there's no great secret to it. The BR blue is the BR blue that it came in. I have just not used an airbrush at all, actually, apart from when I was sealing the surface to apply the numbers and the arrows here. It's been hand painted and just then oil washes applied to create the oil spills here. More oil paint with a little bit of weathering powder to create the sort of smoky exhaust, and again some oil paints and some rust pigments just to create the rust here. And I think it's just about enough. The only other thing I've done is just gone around panel lines and joint lines, again with a little bit of oil, which, when I say oil, I'm just talking about really mucky spirits. So don't get too hung up on buying expensive products. That's one of the things that I've learned. I've got masses of tins of paints and oil paints and probably spent far too much money, when most of the time, at least for the model which I'm trying to portray, just a few colours is enough, and trying to mix them. That again, that's where the artistry comes in, which I don't have. I often ask my wife to help me when I'm trying to mix paints. Show her the colour on the photograph I'm trying to achieve, and then she'll say, needs more blue, red, yellow, things which would never even occur to me to put in to try and get the colour. But I think that's part of having an artist's eye, which I don't have. But anyway, I think that's probably just about enough for this video. I will try to post another video when we do some more work on the track work, maybe even show a bit of work in progress, although I'm not very good at doing that stuff. When I'm working, when I'm modelling working, I'm in the zone, and I don't have the skills to do both. I say I'm a great admirer of anyone, and I would urge you all to remember this when you're looking at somebody else's YouTube video and you're thinking, I don't like the way they've done that, or just remember that they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, I guess you could say, or they're because they're passionate about what they do, but they're also patting their heads and rubbing their tummies at the same time, because they're modelling and somehow actually managing to record and very often narrate what they're doing at the same time. As you can tell by this video, I struggle to do any of those things well at the same time. So anyway, that's it for this video. If you're interested in seeing a bit more details about the weathering processes themselves, or the real inspiration for Spring Mill Street, the layout, the location, I have a Facebook page which is called Spring Mill Street. If you search for that, you should probably find it. It's actually years old. The posts go back a long time. Maybe some will be of more interest, some of less interest. But it's a good way to get in contact with me via Facebook if you have got any questions. But otherwise, please, I'm always happy to receive feedback and questions via YouTube comments as well. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.